Hello everyone, this is Rona Palmer from eMaint Enterprises, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for this month's Best Practices webinar. And I'm really pleased to have with me today a new guest speaker to the program, and that's John Ferguson, CMRP, who will be presenting today's topic, Understanding the Importance of Solid MRO Foundational Data. John, welcome. Glad you could join us today.
Thanks a lot, Rona.
And I'd just like to share with the listeners a little background on John, since he is new to this program, but certainly not new to the industry. And for the past 25 plus years, John has experience in MRO supply chain and asset and maintenance management. And he's experienced in all facets of enterprise asset management, asset reliability, RCM, spare parts material management, MRO foundational data standardization and governance, which is what he'll be speaking about in depth today, as well as overall maintenance management best practices. He has many years' experience with EAM and CMMS systems and how the importance of this data to those systems, and he's performed many system implementations and utilization analyses. And John recently started the Pacific Northwest SMRP chapter for maintenance and reliability professionals in beautiful Pacific Northwest, where I used to reside. And John also attended NC State University in computer science. So, John, again, thanks for joining us today. And we had quite a few people sign up for today's webinar, so this must be a topic that, you know, hit a chord with many of our listeners and viewers out there. And maybe you can share with us, John, you know, you've been in this industry so long and have such a breadth of experience, and what chose you to why did you decide to focus on this particular topic today?
Oh, thanks, Rona. Be glad. First of all, thanks for having me and requesting us to participate. Yeah, I'd be glad to share, you know, kind of why this topic. But I think there's two, in my perspective, there's two basic reasons. In my many years in the business, I have, I guess, probably for every challenge, or I call them war stories, that I've run across with clients that I've worked with and talked to in the maintenance side of the equation, there's probably been at least a 10-to-1 ratio in similar type of war stories on the MRO spare parts inventory side of the equation. That's the first reason. And the second reason I would say is to address, you know, foundational data has been a topic that's been around for a while, but I wanted to address more of the business impact side of the equation and not just the data itself. In other words, for the people on the call and businesses out there, you know, they say, okay, yeah, great, we understand that the data is an issue, but, you know, how does that help us? What does it do for me? And a lot of the people in the audience are probably asking that same question, saying, okay, what does, you know, to get this data standardized and optimized, you know, how's it going to help my everyday life? So I would probably say those are the two main areas why, you know, why I chose this topic, you know, to present.
Okay, great.
For those, one other thing, for those that are in, just to clarify, there'll be a PDF of the presentation available to the registrants, and there will also be, just due to time constraints, there'll be a white paper available as well for anybody that would like it, and they'll be able to request it at the end. And then the last thing, Ron, and I'll turn it back to you for any more housekeeping things before we get started, but in consideration of everybody's time, I think this webinar, correct me if I'm wrong, Ron, is you've allocated an hour, but I'm going to try and keep it to, you know, 30, 35 minutes and then leave room for any questions that have come in. So, you know, like I said, so everybody can get on to their day. But, again, thanks for asking us to participate, and hopefully that answered your question as to why.
Yes, it sure did. Okay, well, I see we have quite a few people on the line now, and a few quick housekeeping things before I turn it back over to John. For all the attendees out there, your phones are on mute just because we are recording today's session, and we'll share the link with all of you if you'd like to go back and watch it or share it with others in your organization after the event, so it reduces background noise. But we really do encourage you. John has been gracious enough to stay right through the top of the hour after the presentation and answer your questions. So please feel free to type them at any time into the questions box on GoToWebinar, and then you can do that at any time during the presentation, And then at the end, we'll read them to John, and he'll answer as many as we can. And of course, we can continue the dialogue afterwards with John as well. There will also be a few polls. So for those of you who are near a keyboard, we are going to ask you to participate in some anonymous polls, just to get a sense of where you are on this topic and your views. All right, well, I think that's about it for housekeeping. So John, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
All right, thanks very much, Rona. Well, I guess we'll get started. I'll move on and start the presentation, but one of the topics that we want to kind of set the basis to is kind of what I call kind of the genesis of what we're talking about here, about how a toxic catalog or an MRO catalog can affect other business processes. And the diagram that's coming up on your screen you should be seeing is a classic example. This is actual data from a client showing this example showing a ball valve and showing in this case 6 different ways in their database that it was described. As you'll notice around, in this case in the top left, the 260893, you can see, some of them are different records. You see over on the right, different ball valves, different descriptions, valve abbreviated. But this is, you have duplicate, inconsistent descriptions affecting your catalog, and being able to search, access information, and get, basically a foundation in place for getting to more higher level MRO processes, whether it be operational excellence or maintenance excellence or just better utilization of your CMMS or EAM system. But taking this classic problem and going to the next screen, this takes an example of taking 3 of those examples from the previous screen that you saw, again, with different, and these actual descriptions are actually a little bit more detailed than we see in a lot of cases. Some cases I've seen where they'll have the word valve in the description at that. But basically taking from the before scenario on your left, moving it to the after scenario, and applying a proper noun modifier to it. In this case, valve is the noun, ball is the modifier, and all the proper, any applicable attributes for this type of MRO part. The black and white verbiage you see on the right, this is pulling from what can be pulled from the client's database, and then the red highlighted text is what we call in optimization or enrichment, which the industry is kind of a terminology to say, okay, let's fill in the blanks on areas that a lot of clients don't have for a given part or an asset, excuse me, a given spare part. In this case, taking all that data, filling in the blanks, and then you see in the bottom is expanding that into a standardized short and or long description that would be used in whatever asset management system you had, eMaint or anything else, but basically to put it in a standardized, consistent format. So when you're looking to, search the catalog, and probably everybody in the attendees in the audience have had cases where, they were trying to find a part. It was an emergency situation, or even just planning work orders, and they try and find a part, couldn't find the part. Then they put in a request for a new part. We'll talk into this in the presentation where you wind up duplicating parts in your inventory and the inventory ballooning, common problems, but this is kind of taking a before and after view of it. Moving on to taking that as a basis to the conversation, the next slide talks a little bit about what we talk about the value chain. The example we just did before, if you were to look at the before scenario, look on the left side of this diagram, that's the low value. You're not getting much use out of your asset management system. You're not putting the foundation in place to support other business practices in the MRO area. You're basically just trying to, it's kind of like firefighting, as has always been called in the maintenance area. There's very inefficient processes because the foundational data is not there. As you look at this chart, we'll kind of move up the value chain, if you will. The next step would be to standardize and enrich the applicable data. You're not going to necessarily enrich or optimize everything in your catalog, everything in your MRO catalog. It's going to be the applicable items, the high value, the high usage, the critical items, that kind of stuff, where that extra information brings that additional value. And then kind of moving up the value chain into the middle, this is where, and we'll talk about this in more detail, putting in a governance model to keep that catalog in place going forward. And we'll talk about this in more detail. And then once you start getting these the foundation solidified, for lack of a better way of putting it, then you can get into optimizing your inventory, looking at spend analysis, what should our maximum minimum stock levels be, what should our order points be based on our usage history, and getting into more advanced, MRO best practices you see at the tail end, and then up in the top right, having that foundation in place to support much broader, corporate initiatives, whether it be maintenance excellence or operational excellence or procurement or, just general, more efficient ways of doing business, but you've got to have that foundation in place. The one last comment on this slide I've got here in red where it talks about, you may have heard in the past about data cleansing. Data cleansing by itself, really doesn't provide the value it needs to. It's not sustainable. You have to have, a standardized, an optimized catalog, and you also have to have that sustainable, we call it governance model, or you'll hear me mention it later, called catalog management in place to keep that in place going forward. The last thing you want to do is to standardize your catalog and then have it fall back into a state of disrepair because you're not setting a governance program in place. We'll move on now to talk a little bit about, this is a bit of a busy slide, but it's a fairly important slide. It talks about, the MRO data quality in different areas, different business processes, which we'll get into in a little bit more detail as we go through the presentation. But some of the business processes that a quality or a toxic MRO catalog can either positively or negatively affect. And just a couple of things talk about, like, for example, time spent looking for parts. That's a big item where people spend a lot of time when they can't find it. They got a toxic catalog. They can't find what they're looking for. Generate a new parts request, your inventory balloons, inefficiency in getting work done on time if they can't find it. And I won't go through each one of these, categories, but you can read it for yourself. But on the bottom left, I think is another important, talks about incomplete data combined with low governance, if any, means no best practice systems. And I can't stress that enough if you're looking at a project like this to get your catalog, your MRO foundation in place to support these other business practices in the MRO area. That foundation is absolutely, mandatory. But anyway, again, keep in mind this will be part of the PDF you get so you can digest and share it internally if you'd like. The next slide is a very, again, one of the, as I told Ron at the beginning, one of my purposes for this presentation and white paper was to address the business equation side of it. What's it going to, you're probably sitting in the yard and saying, what's this doing for me? How's this going to make my life easier? Is to look at it, initially we had the diagram of MRO data on the top, but it is a foundational concept. That foundation of MRO data has got to be solid. So basically, we put it in kind of like a bottom up, and this is by no means all the components or all the business processes or transactional-based components or cost savings areas or corporate initiatives that this can touch and help improve or affect if it's toxic in the catalog. But talking about today, we're going to concentrate mainly on the spare parts part of it. But of course, everybody knows that part of that MRO data is your assets, the asset location hierarchies, the bill of materials. But the spare parts feeds into all that as far as not only the parts used, but if you're looking for replacement parts, if you got a certain part that's out of stock, but does a replacement part meet the specifications? Again, without having that solid data, you can't go out there and find it. But again, I think this is a good slide to paint a bigger picture of what I call the business side of the equation. How a toxic catalog can have that chain reaction throughout your organization to a lot of different areas that it can affect in a, like I said, a positive or a negative way. Rona, at this point, I want to kind of get to the first poll, if you will, and I'll kind of introduce it, and then I'll turn it over to you to actually set it up interactively where our participants can give their comments or their input on. But the first poll, I'd just like to get some feedback on and again, this is anonymous, but what do you think is what would you say is the current condition of your company's catalog data? Obviously, in this case, there's 4 choices. I won't read them. You can look through them. But everything from, hey, it's perfect. We couldn't be any better to, it's purely toxic. It's basically useless, and a couple options in between that. The diagram on the bottom just kind of brings home, a couple of other scenarios, where it's from the data, from sample data. But at this point, I guess for this poll, to Ron, I will turn it over to you to let the people input their information, input their comments, and then we'll move on from there.
Okay, great. I'm going to launch the first poll, so if you can please just type your answers in your keyboard, not in the questions, just box, but respond right into the poll about the current condition of your company's MRO catalog data, with 1 being perfect, 2 okay, 3 is poor, and 4 is we need some help here. Can't find things. Tons of dupes, no consistency. All right, so if you can go ahead and give us your responses. I see we had about 2/3 of the people voting. Also, John, just while people are voting, perhaps you can explain before you go on with your slides. We did have a listener ask you to explain BOM, or bill of material, and what that means. If you don't mind taking a moment when the poll is done, well, we'll do that. Looks like we're about 80% done. Okay. Looks like everyone has cast their votes, so let's go ahead and share the results. John, it looks like 5% say they're perfect, couldn't be any better. And then 55%, the vast majority, said it's okay, but they're here today because they could use some help. 26% say it's pretty poor, it's duplicates and hard to find things. And then 14% say number 4, are toxic, really no consistency in their catalog. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and hide those results and turn it back over to you, John.
Okay, yeah, that's appreciate everybody participating in that input. It's always nice to see the statistics and get the feedback. It's not unusual, the results. They're generally across the board, most of them in the kind of like the middle to the bottom range. But Rona, you did say there was a question about the bill of materials.
Yes, I think someone just asked what is BOM, or
okay,
bill
well,
of material, if you don't mind just giving a
Sure, in this context, BOM is just like Rona said, the bill of materials. In other words, it's a list of the spare parts that are used on any given piece of equipment. You know, it's as far as whether it's a motor or a pump or whatever the asset is, it's comprised of multiple spare parts. And those spare parts are, you know, categorized in what people call bill of materials. In other words, it's real simply all the spare parts components, all the moving components, or it could be electronic components that are part of a given asset. Okay. All right. Well, we'll move on to. Was that the only question right now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll move on. And this next slide talks about kind of what I call the trio of elements. We've talked a little bit about them for a comprehensive, you know, MRO, you know, optimized catalog. And the first area is the catalog optimization. That's basically encompasses the standardizing of the catalog, the parts like you saw in that ball valve, and the optimization. And when I say optimization, a lot of people think, well, you know, we don't need to optimize everything in our catalog, and that's true. There's, you know, there's a percentage of your catalog items that would warrant enrichment optimization, but that's part of that optimization, you know, that component on the bottom of this funnel, if you will. The catalog management, which we talked a little bit about, it's also called governance. We'll get into that a little bit more, but that's where you want to put a program in place if you're going to go to the effort of getting your catalog standardized and optimized to keep it in that condition going forward. I could share several situations, current ones that I know of, where they went to the effort of getting their catalog standardized and optimized and started seeing the value that that brings to the organization, but they didn't either implement or continue using the governance model and use their, you know, in your prior processes to keep, you know, adding and editing to their catalog, and it basically went back to a state of disrepair where it needs to be standardized again. So the catalog management or governance is a critical component to a process like this, because, you know, you don't want to go through that process all over again. The third component in this little diagram is the inventory optimization. That's where once you get that foundation in place and you really want to, you know, start getting more benefit out of your return on that investment you've made, you can start getting into using your actual usage, parts usage data, start applying, you know, real logic and processes to what your stock levels should be, what your max min levels would be, what your order points should be, taking into consideration the criticality of the part within the equipment or the process it's used in, you know, spend analytics, you know, key performance indicators, that kind of stuff. But very useful information, but it's only going to be as useful as the foundational data it's feeding off of. So, and again, all these, the little chart to the right talks about improved capacity, equipment availability. It's all pretty. I think everybody understands that. When you need the part, you got an emergency job to be done. You want to get it, get the job done, and get the process line back on, as an example. But that's what this all feeds into. The next slide we're going to go to. We're going to start getting to a little bit about talking about the different, as I mentioned earlier, the business side of the equation. What does this do for me? Talk a little bit about the different transactions and processes in the MRO environment where your MRO catalog, as you can see up at the top where it says good or bad, a toxic catalog obviously having bad ramifications, a solid, standardized, optimized catalog having good, business benefits. But these are just some of the areas, and pretty self-explanatory to most people on the screen. This is not all of them by any stretch. The white paper that will be available for those that want it gets into this in much more detail. But in my career, I tend to like to use real-life scenarios to get a point across, but talk about, in this case, of spare parts issues and returns, how a bad catalog can affect things. Years ago, I was working with a Midwest manufacturer, and one of their big issues, and this will probably ring true to a lot of people on the call, is the problem of, as we illustriously in the business always call it, a squirrel stores. This gentleman, the plant manager, actually, he had a semi-annual amnesty day where he would allow all workers. He had it in January and July every year. He would tell all the workers, he'd send out a notification, said, bring back all the spare parts you've got in your toolboxes, your cribs, your lockers, wherever. No questions asked, no ramifications, no anything, no retributions. And he said he would be shocked at how many parts he would get back. But that would cause other problems because purchasing was looking at the reorder points and saying, hey, we need to order this, so we'd get more inventory and overstock, the ballooning of the inventory issue. And it's kind of a real-life scenario talking about issues and returns, because bottom line, they were getting the parts issued. They were taking more than they needed because they couldn't, when they go to find them in the past, they couldn't find them because of the catalog. Then they weren't returning them because they wanted to have them the next time they needed them. Everybody, I think most people on this call will know what I'm talking about. But it was kind of, in his scenario, even though it was a novel step, it was more of a Band-Aid. It was not fixing the problem. It was their catalog is one of the real things. And, a good example of, that being a real-world scenario is a perfect lead-in to the next slide, where we start talking about some of the real-world situations. Again, one of the purposes for this white paper and presentation was looking at that business situation. What is it affecting to have if I've got a toxic catalog, what's it affecting, or an inefficient catalog? These are just a couple of examples, searching for parts needed in the catalog and some of the negative ramifications. And again, I won't read through all these. Those watching the presentation, you're welcome to read it. I'll leave it up for a second. And again, it'll be available in the PDF, and again, more detail in the white paper. Work order creation and completion, planning of work orders, planning the spare parts. If the part's not available, looking for replacement parts. And again, the negative ramifications are just some of them. These are not by any stretch all the negative ramifications, but just to highlight a couple of situations. I'll move on to the next slide, which talks about the MRO, the catalog master additions and edits, and again some of the negative ramifications if you've got a toxic catalog, or some people may say a less than efficient catalog. Again, just some of the negative ramifications of a bad catalog and how it can affect this business situation. There are tons more on this. Actually, I'll just a second in case people are reading these bullet points. But the next slide, I'll get into some of the business situations, more from a just a business situation point of view, just for the sake of the timing, the amount of time we have on the webinar, and not to go through them in exhaustive detail, which the white paper does. This slide gets into some of the other areas, talking about inventory reduction goals, physical counts, spend analytics, bill of materials, a lot of other, again, these are not all the business situations, but I just wanted to highlight some other areas within the MRO, arena, if you will, where a toxic catalog can affect these different business practices. And keep in mind, we're just talking about here the normal type day-to-day, week-to-week, CMMS, EAM type work management, business areas. We haven't even begun to address the other bigger initiatives, the RCM, the TPMs, the maintenance excellence, the operational excellence initiatives, stuff that, a lot of you, I run for a lot of companies where corporate, executive management says we need to implement an operational maintenance excellence program. And I've had a lot of clients come to me and say, well, hey, yeah, we need to do this, but, our data won't support it. That's kind of what we're talking about here. This is this is not even addressing those areas at this point. So I will, at this point, I want to move on to the next slide, Rhoda. This is the next poll. So what I'd like to do is to introduce this, Rona, and then you can start the poll live. But in this scenario, of the previous real-world scenarios, I'd like to get some feedback on, where the people in the audience, where you stand on within your organization, just from your opinion. Again, this is anonymous, but just to give us some idea. And again, there's probably other business scenarios or business situations in your operations that may not have been listed on the previous screens. They may be or may not be listed in the white paper, probably are. But just give us your opinion on, again, from zero, we got our act together, it says, to more than 75%, we need help. But, and I'll let you read these options, kind of formulate your answer. And Rona, I'll turn it over to you to let you make this live, and then we'll proceed after that.
Okay, so the polls are open, and John is asking about where you are in this continuum of real-world scenarios that he just described that are impacted by the state of your catalog. 0% being we have our act together, or we don't really experience those those situations, to number 5 being we need some help. And John, while people are voting, we have about a third of them voted so far, one listener did ask, there's different definitions out there. Can you just define MRO as you're using it in this presentation?
Sure, I'm glad to, Rona. Basically, MRO does have a couple of different meanings to that acronym. In this presentation, we're talking about maintenance, repair, and operations. In the aerospace industry, it's sometimes referred to as maintenance, repair, and overhaul. But for the context of this presentation, we're talking about maintenance, repair, and operations, which is the kind of like the whole view of the maintenance management aspect of a business. Everything from materials management to maintenance management, work order management, and everything in that arena. But hopefully that explains it to whoever the questioner was.
Okay, great. So again, we're asking where you are in this continuum. I see people have cast their votes. Open it up a couple more seconds here if you want to type in your response. All right, so let's just share the results. And John, I don't know if these are typical, but 3% say we have our act together. 2% fall into the next category. We have challenges, but we're kind of getting by. Number 3 said we're making headway. That was 41%. That was the majority, but they still have a ways to go, and I guess that's why they're here today. Number 4 say we're in decent shape, but we can still improve. That was 26%. And then last for number 5, 18% say we could use some help. All right, so that's kind of our bell curve for this.
Well, perfect. And again, I greatly appreciate the input from everybody. It's always nice to see quantifiable feedback, even albeit anonymous, from people to see where they think they're at. And again, those statistics that Rona read off are pretty consistent with what we see. Most organizations still have a decent to a long way to go to get to where they really want to be in more efficiently than the whole MRO maintenance, repair, and operations, and the whole asset reliability space. And again, I can't stress it enough about the foundational data component, how that that chain reaction, how that feeds into everything else. So, okay, we'll move on to the next slide. This again is a bit of a more high-level slide, but one of the key points, a couple of the key points on this slide I want to talk about is the top line where it talks about the value chain that has multiple interdependencies, as we talked about on that diagram earlier, the spider diagram I call it, or the interdependencies, the one that had the iPad backdrop. Excuse me. But the left side of here again talks about getting your data, get it optimized, get it in a good condition, and you can move more towards spend analysis, procurement cost reduction initiatives. Once that foundation's in place, it highlights a couple of different topics in here. And then to the right, getting into even more detailed MRO best practices. First bullet point talks about excess and obsolete parts. I'd venture to say that probably everybody in this group, if you're in the maintenance, operations area, MRO area, that you could probably walk out to your storerooms or storeroom or closets, wherever your parts are kept, and there's probably parts sitting out there that may have further down the chart where it talks about the operational process excellence, just highlighting a few bullet points. Again, getting that foundation in place, getting it solidified, and seeing, other areas that it'll make your life easier, your company more profitable, more efficient, better, as they say, a better bottom line. And on the bottom where that it benefits so many different areas once that catalog data is in place and standardized. But again, you can with the PDF, you could digest this and share it internally if you'd like a little bit more. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it, but I think that last sentence is very true. There's so many benefits it brings. We're just scratching the surface in this presentation. This next slide kind of takes a little bit of a different perspective on that. We talk about the benefit or impact areas, and you see down the bottom where it says opportunities to drive efficiencies in the MRO life cycle, the value chain or life cycle, whatever phrase you want to use. But this takes it from kind of like what I call a cradle to grave view, within your inventory. Whoops, got the wrong way. In this slide highlights, first side on the left side is the evaluate plan process, the very early stages. This could be planning for a new process line or a whole new plant, or basically looking at what this is looking at is different potential areas where you can drive efficiencies and some percentage ranges from what we've seen where those efficiencies could come into play. And of course, these are all not only efficiencies in production and productivity, but they're all inventory cost reductions. They all go pretty much to the bottom line, helping not only from efficiencies but cost control. The next phase is talking about the design build aspect of it, as far as capital spares, warranty management improvement. The next one getting into the actual acquisition and installation of the equipment, other potential areas. And these are not all areas. This is just to kind of give a, just kind of highlight for the thought process of where some of those opportunities are, it says, to be more efficient, and improve your processes. The next component, the maintain and repair, probably near and dear to the heart of a lot of people on this call. That's the day-to-day, week-to-week activities of your as you're using an eMaint or other systems as far as maintaining your current equipment and process lines and multiple different areas that can see improvement with a solid foundational catalog. The overhaul and upgrade column, if you will. That could be areas where it's a plant shutdown, or you're re-engineering a piece of equipment or a process line for another product that you're producing, or you could be re-engineering one of those a process line or a piece of equipment for just more reliability. You've done some analysis, and the reliability engineers that may be on the call, you've got something you say, hey, if we did this to this piece of equipment or this process line, we could make it more reliable. And then the last section is talking about the divest and dispose. We talked about that a little bit before, about being able to identify those parts that you're not using anymore, and and a disposal plan to get rid of them and get potential money back for those in those areas, if you will, for those parts that are sitting there that in a lot of cases you don't even have the equipment anymore. But again, this all are the business benefits that drives back to that foundational data, the solidness of that to be able to support these kind of processes. So we'll move on to the next slide, and I just want to talk a little bit here about some of the different business benefits, and by having a standardized and optimized catalog. And these are only some, and these pretty much all go to the bottom line, the company as far as more efficiency, better profitability, shareholder return, whatever analogy, whatever what filter you want to put on it, looking at depending on where you are in the organization. But this just talks about just a few of the, like reducing inventory just from, identifying duplicates and obsolete material. We see fairly substantial reductions that companies can, get to that, by reducing just the duplicates, when they standardize the catalog and optimize it. And then that leads into, preserve more working capital, helps with finance costs, inventory turns, and so forth. And again, I won't go through every one of these bullet points, but these are just some of them that address the different business benefits that having a solid MRO catalog helps with. And again, the white paper will go into it in more detail, but I just want to highlight a few to put a business perspective on it. This next slide is, to me, paints a very, very good picture, kind of like in a one-slide format, but taking a holistic approach, what I call it, to your improving the whole MRO processes, but call it the MRO. We call it MRO Lifecycle Management, what I call it. But it breaks it down into kind of 4 different components. The first one being the standardize and govern that we've been talking about the last 20 minutes, 25 minutes or so. But standardizing and optimizing applicable data, identifying duplicates, putting a governance program in place, integrating with your ERP, AEM, and for those folks on the call, you're like eMaint. I'm sure there may be some eMaint users on the call. But whatever your ERP system or EAM system or CMMS system is, that's kind of the first, if you want to call it, piece of this circle. And then the next is getting into the inventory optimization. And you saw a slide earlier where we had the 3 balls in that funnel, but this kind of breaks it down. But when we talk about optimization, is using your own usage history with the accurate data that a solid foundational catalog will provide. You can actually get in and put some logic to your reorder points and your max-min levels and stock levels and lead times, taking into consideration criticality of the parts, getting into, checking out for potential stock outs, kind of like call it predictive analysis of your MRO catalog. Say, we've got these potential stock outs coming up based on your inventory balances and your usage history, but putting some logic to this whole process rather than jokingly kind of putting a thumb in the wind, say, I think we need 5 of these, and and which I hate to say that still goes on a lot from what we see. But that's the second phase to this. The third is, once you have those pieces in place, is getting into more best practices, whether it be optimizing your physical storeroom, streamlining your storeroom practices, better planning and scheduling practices, to the whole reliability, RCM, TPM, getting into more of the reliability area. And again, these are all, they're directly affected by the quality of the data in your foundation, your MRO catalog, and all the other foundational components. And then the last piece is talking about the disposition. The opposite, we talked about this a little bit before, but, the identifying the obsolete non-functional parts. Hey, can they be used somewhere else in the company? If you're a multi-site company or an international company, I've seen this time and time again where people have a part and they don't have that need for it in that plant anymore, but they got a plant across the country that does have that same piece of equipment, but their data doesn't let them ascertain that. So this is a great slide, to share internally or kind of read through again, because it paints a really good picture, I think, in one slide of the different components, all at a pretty high level, but it gives you a good topic for discussion. Rona, this leads into our third and last poll. So what I'll do is I will introduce the poll, and then I will again let you take over to get the input from the folks. But this poll, basically says what aspects of your operations do you feel are most adversely affected by poor toxic catalog data that you might have. And again, I put that slide on the bottom from earlier with the iPad background showing a lot of the different process areas. And again, by no means does it cover every area that the data could affect within your MRO, the whole MRO process. But this just talks about a little bit, option 1, what's your biggest problem? Is it wasted time searching for the right part, or your inventory ballooning up, too many duplicates, not able to support other maintenance reliability initiatives? And you can, and actually, item number 4 I see quite a bit, but a lot of people, they have great asset management maintenance systems, eMaint being one of them, but they are not getting the benefit out of those systems because the data that is going in, it's the old, I hate to say it, you probably heard it 1,000 times, but garbage in, garbage out. If you don't have good foundational data to support anything from work order, analyzing work orders, completed work orders, or delayed work orders because of one reason or another, or parts usage data, a lot of people, that's a big issue. And of course, number 5 is all of the above. So Rona, I will turn it over to you for the actual poll, and then we'll pick up from there.
Okay. So again, John is asking just to have our listeners vote here and say which aspect of your operations are most adversely affected by poor data. The time you spend searching for parts, duplicate parts, not able to support some other maintenance and reliability initiatives, sorry, that word was cut off there, or unable to get the information out of your CMMS or EAM system and perform the analytics you'd like to perform, or maybe it's all of the above. All right, so it looks like about 2/3 of the people have voted, so we'll leave this up for a few more seconds and tell us which problem is the one that you're experiencing most as a result of your catalog data. Okay, looks like the answers are largely in, so let's go ahead and share this with everyone. So John, 20% of the people are saying it's time searching for the right part is the biggest impact. Only 2% saying duplicate parts is an issue. 7% saying not able to support other initiatives. 20% saying they can't really get the type of data out of their CMMS that they'd like. And then 51, or the vast majority, is saying all of the above. Okay, back to you.
Perfect. And again, thanks to everyone for participating in the poll. I was, to be honest with you, I figured that all of the above would be the biggest majority of the responses. It was, because it's pretty consistent with what we see. It's kind of all across the board. In item number 3 or 4, we see that a lot as well as some of the big, areas of challenges that people have we talk to. So, okay, well, we'll move on. We've got a couple more slides, and then we'll leave it up for any other additional questions that have come in. But I want to kind of talk a couple things about what I call points to ponder. By no stretch of the imagination to just cover all of them. And again, the white paper goes into more detail. But this just talks a little bit about, some of the things to think about. Companies, they need to recognize how important solid foundational data is, and a lot of companies recognize that. But I'll get to it in just a second as far as I think some of the reasons why they don't put the emphasis on that. But they got to understand the other business areas. What I said, the business impact side of what it does to make your company's life easier and your job easier by having that foundational data in place. And it leads in the second point about get the data right, get the foundation right, and any other related goals or initiatives are going to be much easier. We see a lot of times frequently companies don't have the internal expertise required to get their catalog in the right shape, and a lot of it, especially, and put in a proper governance program, because that takes a lot of effort. And then lack of emphasis, kind of like what I tied back. Some companies actually understand the importance, but they just don't put the emphasis on it. Kind of like they would put on their ERP system or their financial system. But by doing that, by not doing that, and you guys in the statistics, the polls we had, pretty self-evident that a lot of companies are still struggling to get the best use out of their systems and work efficiently and effectively, as it says here. And then lastly, talk about organizations waste, at least from our experience, are wasting a lot of time trying to put these, operational excellence, maintenance excellence, procurement excellence, inventory reduction initiatives, whatever it might be, in place. And a lot of times I see it coming from corporations. Actually, I've got one current utility that I'm talking to where their executives came down and said they had to put a maintenance and operational excellence program in place. But I know some people there, and they called me up and said, we've been kind of mandated to do this, but we know we're going to have trouble doing it because our data won't support it. A common problem, but that's kind of gets back to that I sound like a broken record. Get back to that, getting the foundation in place. It's kind of like building a 5-story office building. You build it on a foundation of mud. It's not going to sustain very well. It's not going to work the way it should. It's kind of a visual analogy, but it kind of gets to the point. And then at the bottom here, we have actually a quote from a company that's gone through a Material Master data enrichment program, and actually a quote from them. And there's hundreds of these out there where companies have actually gone through a process, and they actually see the like I said, this can be self-funding, see early benefits, and see long-term benefits, and those benefits go on for years to come if you implement it properly. And this is kind of like the last slide, and we'll leave it up to Q&A, but this is what I call challenges and considerations. Something you might want to think about if you're in the middle of a project like this, or you guys are debating doing a project of this nature, is keep in mind it's optimizing your catalog. It's not a trivial task. Many companies have tried it, either have or are doing that, and they're realizing that to be the case. It's not a very simple process. Excuse me. And then the second bullet point, talk about understanding how complex it is, and the process is basically you need to look at it from I use the term again holistic, but a high level view, because of all the interdependencies, and I can't stress that enough. Kind of going back to that chart that was on the using the iPad as a backdrop, the interdependencies chart, about all the different business processes that toxic MRO data can affect in a negative way. Another question: if anybody's on the call, you're a global company, or even a company that's grown through acquisitions, are you going to be dealing with multiple languages? Are there multiple EAM or ERP or CMMS systems that are come to play that you need to integrate with? The next bullet point, again, considerations. You need to have the proper tools and methodology, so you can make sure all the steps of the process are done properly, because building that foundation is no different than building a foundation like I was using the analogy on the office building. You got cement, you got rebar, you got all the other connecting points to make it solid. It's no different. The next to the last bullet point, what other corporate initiatives, and I've talked about some of these, I won't read it, but what other corporate initiatives are currently in the works or on the drawing board that this process will affect, in a positive way or a negative way. Of course, negative being if it's, in a toxic state or a less than useful state. And then the last point is, your end result of a process like that, should you be embarking on one, would be a standardized and optimized catalog. And I underlined it and put it in red. I'm hoping it comes through in red for everybody. But a governance plan that supports those specific MRO business goals. Again, you can't stress enough how important it is to have that governance plan in place, because you don't want to waste your time or investment to get your catalog optimized and standardized and then in a solid foundational component to support all these other business situations, and then let it go back fall into a state of disrepair or back to it was because you didn't put that governance plan in place. So with that said, we'll open up to Q&A, and then I will, after there are any questions that have come in that Rona's got on the list that she wants to bring up, then I'll pull up a slide with my contact information if anybody would like to, you want to request the white paper or you got any other questions. But at this point, I'll just turn it over to you, Rona, if there are any questions that have come in that you want to bring up.
Okay. And again, to all our listeners, please feel free to type your questions into the question box. And, John has agreed to stick around till the top of the hour to answer as many as he can. And one that came in, John, was how do you know the current state of your catalog? I gather many of our listeners, based on their responses, are feeling the effects of it. But if they have to get senior management to see the value, how do you determine just how bad your catalog is at the moment?
Well, and as far as getting down to getting an analysis, probably the best way is to get an analysis done of your catalog. And there are companies that do that. Putting a plug for us, we do that. But basically, get an analysis of your catalog and see where it's at. What percentage of the items are potential duplicates. Get some examples of an analysis of your items. How many actually have proper nouns attached to them somewhere. What's the consistency? How does it compare to industry averages or industry standards? But I think that probably the biggest key component is to get that analysis done, because that'll get into an exhaustive detail on kind of your current state of affairs, if you will. Most people that know they've got a bad catalog, they know it's bad, but they don't know how bad it is. But I would probably say that's probably the best way to get a good handle on kind of where you're at today. If that, hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, yeah, I think it does. And by the way, people are asking if a recording of the session will be available, and yes, we will be emailing the attendees as well a link to the recording if you'd like to listen back again or share it. We also had a listener ask, who should be responsible for correct and accurate data on new items going in? Is that the plant, the requester? And a secondary question the same listener asked is, who's really the owner of the MRO database? Is that master data or the plant? So this, I'm gathering this is in a multi-location installation.
Right. Well, again, that's at least from my experience, that answer can vary depending on the organization. I have seen it. If it's especially it gets more complicated if it's a multi-location organization. But generally, I mean, the ones I've seen in the past is sometimes they will have actually an inventory or a spare parts catalog, call it a data steward or an administrator, or it may be, it's generally not the maintenance people that are in charge of it, which some of them probably would like to, but it's generally somebody in stores or procurement, or in some organizations I've run into lately where they actually have an MRO indirect materials director, project lead, where they're in charge of it, because of course the indirect materials are different than the direct or the materials used in producing product. But it's kind of all across the board as far as, if I understood the question correctly, sometimes it could be just a data steward that, for example, if you put a governance program in place, my recommendation is you have all those catalog, new catalog requests, catalog modifications, changes done. Have them feed through a standard kind of a workflow process where it goes to one person, or it could be multiple people that are in charge of the spare parts catalog or the MRO indirect materials, and they basically review them and make sure, yeah, this meets our standards. Which if you have a governance program in place, that will be defined and managed by whatever tool you're using. But generally in a I guess lowest common denominator, it's either somebody from the material side of the house or from the procurement purchasing side of the house. More efficiently, I've seen it from the material side, where you have somebody they are in charge of the MRO spare parts for the whole operation. And again, that could be one or more people depending on the organization, if it's multi-location or even multi-country. But when it gets much more dispersed like that, then you generally have multiple people involved with it, from my experience.
That's a good point. So when there's multiple people, that's why the governance plan is so important. Here's another attendee that asked, categorizing parts is a very big problem for this listener. And he just asked, in your experience, you did show some examples of standardized naming convention, but I think he's asking about, in your experience, what's the best way to categorize your parts at a higher level, by line, by equipment? I realize, again, there's probably not a short answer, but maybe you can give a little bit from your experience.
There's really not. As a matter of fact, I was just on a call with some people yesterday, people I'm talking to, and right now they're categorizing their parts based on the process that part is used in, what it's producing. I've seen that all across the board, but as far as, to me, there's different ways of categorizing how that part is used, what equipment is used on, what process is used on. But if you get, again, back to the foundational data, number one, you've got to categorize it based on where it fits in the taxonomy, or in the what we call the example we used earlier about the valve. It's categorized as a noun, as a valve, as a modifier of a ball. Then again, that's that's the basic lowest common denominator. But when you tie that part into where it's used, it could be used, that given part could be used on multiple pieces of equipment, multiple processes. So it all depends on the individual client. But again, in lieu of the sounding like a broken record, you got to get it categorized right in the catalog itself to have it apply across the board, and you get the benefit of, regardless of how you internally charge that part out to. Some places I've seen them charge a part out to work orders, and it rolls up to the asset, it rolls up to the cost center, it rolls up to a GL code, and I've seen people bypass that whole process where they charge a part right out to a GL code, and then they're missing a lot of the benefits in between. So, that's a question that would take quite a while, depending on the company's particular needs. But bottom line is you got to get that basic foundation of what that part what that part's defined as within the context of the MRO foundational data. The rest, again, it could vary from client to client.
Gotcha. Several people have been asking about the receiving a copy of the presentation, so I just did want to reiterate that John will be emailing out a copy as well after the session is ended. Can you define, in one of your slides, you refer to Blackstock. Can you define what that is, John?
Yeah, Blackstock is generally, most people refer to it. I talked about obsolete materials, as I talked about in a couple of the slides, of materials that are sitting out on storeroom shelves right now, in companies all over the world that they probably don't even have the equipment anymore that it's used on. And a lot of people know that, but they don't know it for sure, and they're worried about, well, maybe it's a critical piece of equipment. We can't get rid of it because we may need it. It may be, the part has to come from somewhere in Europe, takes 6 months for delivery time, lead time, so they're always hesitant to get rid of it. But having that foundational data in place makes it much easier to ascertain what that part is, what's it used on, and then be able much easier to ascertain can it be gotten rid of. We refer to it in the again like obsolete materials, but that kind of some people call it Blackstock.
Gotcha. I think we'll have time for one more question here. In your experience, John, who typically initiates a project such as this to really kind of get your arms around the catalog? As you said, it had such broad reaching ramifications throughout the organization.
From my experience,
variety of departments.
Right, I'll answer that two different ways. Historically, when I say historically, going back years, anything like this generally came from either the maintenance superintendent or maintenance staff or the workers or maybe planners, schedulers, procurement people, knowing they got a problem. But more and more lately, I say lately being the last year or two, I've seen more requests for this kind of a initiative or program to get the data standardized, in place. Is not really from that topic, the standardization topic, but it's from the operational and maintenance excellence, perspectives, and it comes from much higher in the organization. And I've had a couple recently where it's actually almost come as a mandate from executive VPs or COOs, where this system will be put in place. You do what you got to do to get it done, and the people that are in the mid-tier, the MRO materials people or the maintenance plant superintendent, or the whatever the mid-range manager is, they know that, okay, for me to do this that the executive VP wants, we've got to get this foundational data in place. The maintenance people have known this, and the stores people have known this for years. But in answer to that question, I think it's historically it was more from the bottom up. But lately, I've been hearing a lot from the top down, where they're saying they're not calling it get your data organized. They're saying improve your maintenance processes, streamline things, help us with cost controls, and then that's ties into the foundational data that the people that are mandated to, or tasked, if you will, to get the job done, that they're actually saying, okay, we need to get this data in place so we can support what they're asking us to do.
Cool. Well, John, okay. I think we are at the top of the hour. So if there are additional questions, John, perhaps you want to share your contact information?
Yeah, I just popped the slide up there.
Great. And again, thank you so much, John, for putting together this presentation. And, you're right, it is such a big topic that just really set things in motion, and perhaps we can, consider follow-ons, because there is so much to the topic of, this is such a foundational element to the success of any program. So thank you for putting that together.
Be glad to do that, because like I said, when you get to the business, as I say, the business side of the business benefit side of the equation, it's just immense, that people are just starting to realize, I think.
Absolutely. And again, thanks to everyone today who's been listening in.